Good morning. Welcome to Pine Grove Bible Church. It's good to see you this morning. We're going to get started by singing a couple songs. The first one is Your Grace is Enough. We've been talking and reading through the book of Judges. And as JJ has mentioned a couple times, it is a very cyclical book. And it's the Israelites having God as their God and not other false gods. And then falling away and falling into sin and falling into oppression from other places and calling out to God. And God hears them, He remembers His people, and He raises up a leader to bring them back to Him, and then they do the same thing over and over. But no matter how many times it happens, God still hears their cry and remembers them. And He does the same for us. So let's stand and sing about God's grace.
So remember your people, remember
Even when we act like the people in Israel during the time of the Judges, even when you provide for us, even when you save us from opposition, when you save us from our idolatry, even when you bring us back to you and fall away again, you still have grace for us, you still show mercy to us, and you don't let us go. God, I pray that you would continue to remember your people, that you would continue to reach out for us even when we fall away, God. And I pray that you would give us the strength to stand firm in our faith, stand firm in our conviction that, and our hope that you will send your Son to renew this earth, that you will send your Son to remove the shadow of death, to remove the valleys of suffering that we go through, to remove the sin that so easily entangles us, God. I pray that we do not become complacent. I pray that we do not take for granted your mercy, your kindness, your grace, your constant pursuit of our hearts. I pray this in Jesus' name. You may be seated. So you may have noticed when you walked in that there's a nice new television displaying our announcements. So if you would like to, during fellowship time, you can look back there. Just a couple I want to mention is the Feed My Starving Children packing event, the Sheridan story packing event. There are sign-up sheets back there, as well as the sign-up sheet for the blood drive. Those are all next month. An announcement of an upcoming event for this week is the Friday Night Alive and Mini Golf. Now those are not, it's not an all or nothing. You don't have to come and play mini golf if you don't want to. You can just come and sing with us and hear a great devotional message. That starts at 7 p.m. this Friday, and mini golf will follow. I believe that is it, unless someone else has some more announcements. Okay. At this time, we are going to take our tithes and offerings. So, let's pray. God, once again, we thank you for the many blessings that you shower upon us, that you give to us, that we do not deserve. That is everything that we have. God, I pray that this morning we will give cheerfully and with unclenched fists, and that we would give with hearts that are joyful to be given to you because of the abundance that you've given to us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. If you'll stand with us again, we are going to sing Trading My Sorrows. Just like the people in the time of the book of Judges would fall away, fall back into sin, fall into idolatry, we are prone to do the same thing. So what we need to do is trade our sorrows, trade our shame, trade our sickness, trade our pain, and say yes to the abundant joy that is found in our Father. This heart open wide from the depths, from the heights, I will the sacrifice. These hands did I hear my song, hear my cry, my prayer, the sacrifice.
Good morning. Let's spend a moment in prayer. Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you that we can gather here and worship you and fellowship with other believers, that we can enjoy each other's presence and learn together. Father, as we dig into your word this morning, I ask that you would give us wisdom, that we would see how you work in individuals in the book of Judges, and how similarly you can work in us, and how we can look at those situations and apply them to our lives. Father, I again thank you for this day and ask that you would bless our time this morning. In your Son, Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So this morning we're finishing up our little series through the book of Judges. Just as a little recap, remember we talked about Samson. We looked at that idea that, even though bad things happen, sometimes good things can come out of those. We looked at Deborah and Barak and saw that God can remove obstacles. He can neutralize our enemy's strengths. If he's called us to do something, that is something that he will do. And last week we looked at Gideon and at that idea that God's not about glorifying us. God's about us glorifying him. And then later will glorify us when we take part in that coming kingdom of his Son. So this week, we are looking at a different story. But first, have you ever had something come up that was unexpected? I'm sure you have. Most of us have. Sometimes you might go into work and you weren't expecting anything out of the ordinary, and you're like, actually, we're going to have a meeting first thing. And, it might not be anything serious, but it's unexpected, and you might not be prepared for that. I remember one morning I came into work, and a bunch of the higher-up bosses were pacing around and looking all worried, and came to find out that one of our coworkers had died in a house fire. That really throws off your day when you come into that. You weren't expecting that. It kind of sets the tone. So there's expectations that we have of people being there, and when they're not there, it's strange. It's unexpected. Sometimes when we anticipate things, though, that can make the unexpected even more. When we know something behaves a certain way, and we see that it's not behaving the way that it should. Like maybe you have a dog. You know this dog, it's been not like Georgia. Georgia freaks out whenever anybody comes to the door. But some dogs are very friendly. They'll be friendly to everyone. And then let's say you have that dog and it's always acted the same way, but then for some reason somebody comes to your house and your dog starts growling at them. That's unsuspected. That would kind of throw you off. You wouldn't know what to think about that because it's odd. It's out of the ordinary. It's out of that particular behavior that you've come to expect. Now, I'm a baseball fan, and one of my favorite pitchers is Greg Maddux. And there's a story about him, how he intentionally threw a certain pitch to a batter that he anticipated facing in the playoffs later that year and gave up a home run. And so that pitcher, or that batter, was anticipating seeing that pitch in that playoff series, and he never threw it. So he was waiting for it, he was looking for it, but it never came. So he was anticipating it, but it didn't happen. It didn't go as that batter had anticipated. But Maddux had planned this out so that he could have the advantage. Now, I'm a comedy fan. I like quirky comedy, things that are just wacky. Now, comedy is a very dangerous subject to get into because there are some comedians that are inappropriate. They might have some things that are clean and funny, and then you would go to find out that there are some other things that aren't. But one of the things in comedy that works very well in making people laugh is the setup. You set people up to anticipate a certain punchline or outcome, and then you go completely off the wall and something else comes out. And I wasn't expecting that. It was hilarious, but I was not expecting that. So one sketch that I find to be quite funny, there's a woman sitting in a parlor, and this man walks in and starts explaining something to her, and she's like, I don't understand what you're saying. So he repeats it a couple of times, and she's like, I don't understand this. I was just told to tell you to. I wasn't expecting some kind of Spanish Inquisition. And then these conquistadors hop in and say, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Not very expected. It was a setup that was a complete misdirect. But we can look in our lives, and if we are anticipating certain things to happen and they don't happen the way we anticipate, it throws us off. It's weird. So, how does that tie into Scripture? Well, we'll look at that here in a couple minutes. But we are going to set up, we're going to be in Judges chapter 3, starting at verse 12. And here we're not too long after Joshua has died. Israel has been turning away from God. And it's interesting in the beginning of chapter 3, we've seen the Philistines and the Midianites and all these other groups. He said, chapter 3, verse 1 says, "These are the nations the Lord left in order to test all of those in Israel who had not experienced the wars in Canaan." So we get an idea of why Israel is dealing with these people and why God has left them on the scene. But verse 12 says, "The Israelites again did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He gave King Eglon of Moab power over Israel, because they had done what was evil in his sight." So after Eglon convinced the Ammonites and the Amalekites to join forces with him, he attacked and defeated Israel and took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites served King Eglon of Moab for 18 years. It says in verse 15, "Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he raised up Ehud, son of Gera, a left-handed Benjamite, as a deliverer for them. The Israelites sent him with the tribute for King Eglon of Moab." Just a show of hands, how many people here are left-handed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're a little bit over average. So the national average or world average of people that are left-handed is about 10%. So it's not a super common thing. So it's kind of a surprise to see that many left-handed people here in this group. Something that's interesting is that in Major League Baseball, about 25% of players are left-handed. So it's a little bit above the average of just the normal populace. But it's very possible that these Moabites had never seen anybody that was left-handed before. Because there's genetics and stuff that can come into play in that. So it's possible they've never seen a left-handed pitcher before. Now, in baseball, left-handed pitchers have an advantage in a lot of ways because most hitters have only faced right-handed pitchers growing up. So they're not used to the ball coming from this opposite direction. So every once in a while, you'll get one of those left-handed pitchers that's just super dominant. The one that comes to my mind is Randy Johnson. I grew up watching Randy Johnson pitch. He terrorized a lot of baseball players, especially left-handed hitters. And one of the favorite things that I saw was, I believe it was in the All-Star game one year, there's a baseball player named John Kruk who had never had any luck whatsoever against Randy Johnson. He's a left-handed batter, so he takes his helmet, puts it on backwards, and stands in the right-handed batter's box. And he's like, well, I got just as much of a chance at hitting him doing this. And then there was also the time that Randy Johnson made a bird explode, but we don't need to go into details on that. That is one of my favorite videos of things that happened with Randy Johnson. But the language here is interesting. So we don't know if Ehud is necessarily just naturally left-handed, because the Hebrew there, the words yamin and itter, the yamin means right hand, and the other word that's used in describing this is indicates being shut up or bound. So it's possible that maybe he had some sort of deformity or some sort of injury that caused his right hand to not function properly. So he uses his left hand. More on that in a moment. But clearly the reason that is there for a reason. It's there for a specific purpose that it points that out. Because you wouldn't necessarily, in the run of things, think that would be a big deal. But it said, the Israelites sent him with the tribute for King Eglon of Moab. Now the tribute was kind of for the king to say, hey, you guys owe me stuff. You remember, I conquered you. Give me this so that I don't have to come and terrorize you and strike you down again. And so that concept of the tribute, if you're familiar with the Hunger Games books or movies, they had to give tribute. So this is a kind of a post-apocalyptic sci-fi story. And the districts had all uprised against the central government, and they defeated these people, so they were making them send tribute, which was a child to go and fight to the death. I don't think it's anything quite as extreme here. But that idea of tribute, you have to give up something. It's of value, and it's significant. It signifies something important, that you need to remember something. So it says, Ehud made himself a double-edged sword, 18 inches long. It was interesting when reading that. The word there is gomed, which it could actually be a 13-inch sword. The length doesn't really matter all that much, but I thought it was interesting, some of the linguistics there. It's a smaller sword, and it says that he strapped it to his right thigh under his clothes. Now, if you're right-handed, you're going to strap the sheath for your sword on your left side, because you want to be able to hold it with your left hand and pull it out, and then you're ready to attack. If you had it here, you'd have to reach across your body, which would be really awkward, and you have to torque your wrist, and it's not coming out naturally, and then you're not in a position where you can fight very easily. So if you were wanting to sneak up on somebody and attack them, that would be very conspicuous. But if you're left-handed, the same thing's going to happen. If you have it on your right side here, it's not going to work very well. So he's got it on his right thigh. So it says in verse 17, so they brought the tribute to King Eglon of Moab, who was an extremely fat man. It says that when Ehud had finished presenting the tribute, he dismissed the people who had carried it. At the carved images near Gilgal, he returned and said, King Eglon, I have a secret message for you. So apparently there was an oracle or something that sat near these carved images near Gilgal. That's what the commentaries that I've read had kind of signified. And if you remember Deborah, she had kind of set up shop by this palm of Deborah. People would come to her to settle disputes and to hear prophecies, things like that. So it's probably something like that. So the king would have been familiar that this person was there doing this. So he's like, oh, okay. So he says, silence. And it says all his attendants left him, because he wanted to hear what Ehud had to say. It says, then Ehud approached him while he was sitting alone in his upstairs room, where it was cool. Now, there might have been a few minutes time lapse here. It might not have been just a right away thing. He says, Ehud, I have a message from God for you. It says, the king stood up from his throne. And it's possible that he had been relieving himself at this time. So it says in verse 21, Ehud reached with his left hand, took the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into Eglon's belly. It says even the handle went in after the blade. And so Eglon's fat closed in over it, so that he did not withdraw the sword from his belly. And it says the waste came out, which basically means he pooped himself. Ehud escaped by way of the porch, closing up and locking the doors of the upstairs room behind him. So it says in verse 24, Ehud was gone when Eglon's servants came in. They looked and found the doors of the upstairs room locked and thought he was relieving himself in the pool room. The servants waited until they became embarrassed and saw that he had still not opened the doors of the upstairs room. So they took the key and opened the doors, and there was their lord lying dead on the floor. Now it says that Eglon was a large man. He probably ate a lot of food, gorged himself, so they were accustomed to him having some digestive issues, and so they didn't want to disturb him in the middle of that. But it says once they themselves were embarrassed, something wrong is going on here, they went to check on him. So this gave Ehud enough time to escape, to get away from that location. It says that he escaped while the servants waited. He passed the Jordan near the carved images and reached Sierra. After he arrived, he sounded the ram's horn throughout the hill country of Ephraim. The Israelites came down with him from the hill country, and he became their leader. He told them, follow me, because the Lord has handed over your enemies, the Moabites, to you. So they followed him, captured the fords of the Jordan, leading to Moab, and did not allow anyone to cross over. At that time, they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all stout and able-bodied men. Not one of them escaped. Moab became subject to Israel that day, and the land had peace for 80 years. Now, we've seen those times of peace that the Israelites have experienced. It's been sometimes 40 years. So this 80 years is kind of a long, unexpected amount of time for them to be at peace. And so what can we learn from this account? Well, much like Ehud takes Eglon and the Moabites by surprise, so too can sin sneak attack us when we think we know what to look for. Complacency allows sin to attack from places we don't expect. So typically no one knows us better than we know ourselves. So something that we might think would be good to do, if we know we struggle with a certain sin, maybe we take a concordance and look up verses that only have to do with this particular sin. And that's very well and good for that, but if that's all we're focused on, if we're not keeping our eyes out, keeping our mind out for other things that might entrap us and snare us, we might find ourselves caught by surprise. So if you're someone that struggles with lust, let's say, you might do a very good job at avoiding places where you might see things that tempt you, and have internet filter software on your computer, stuff like that, so that you're not tempted by lust. But if that's all you're focused on, something else might be able to catch you by surprise. So say you're at work and you're walking and you find a wallet that's got like $1,000 in it. There's no ID, nothing like that. So, well, I don't know who it belongs to, so I could just take it. Is that kind of a gray area, or would that be stealing? Because you know that money doesn't belong to you. And $1,000 in the grand scheme of things is not a lot of money. But, for one person, that could be a lot of money. So what you should do is take it to the security guard's desk and say, hey, I found this wallet. But if you haven't really been thinking about stealing and why it's wrong and taking things that aren't yours, it might be easy for you to slip up in that way. Maybe you've been married for a really long time and you never had any issues. You've never been distracted by another person. You've never even had that inkling of cheating. But then, maybe later on something happens. You're stressed out. Maybe there's a death in the family that's causing some tensions, and you have never even really considered having to avoid certain kinds of interactions because it's never been a temptation. It's never been a struggle for you. But then in that stress, in that moment, you let your guard down because you never expected to have to face this kind of thing. And you end up having an affair. If you had always had that in mind, even though it wasn't something big that was, that you felt like you were tempted with, you always need to be looking out and preventing sin to have an opportunity to take a hold of you. So I think that's important. We need to certainly pay extra attention to what we know we struggle with what we know is going to be a stumbling block for us. But we also have to keep in mind all those other things that surround us and could potentially cause us to stumble, that could cause us to fall. And so that's the story, or the moral of the story that I see, that we want to be prepared. We want to be ready for the enemy's attacks. So it's not enough that we just say, well, everybody is right-handed, so I don't have to check where I don't expect that sword or that dagger to be. Because we should anticipate attacks coming from anywhere. So I'll leave you with this thought, and the band can go ahead and start coming back forward. Complacency allows sin to attack from places that we don't expect. Let's bow. Father, you're so good to us, and you give us great counsel in Scripture, and you give us great people to fellowship with and to help us as we deal with temptations and as we deal with sin in our lives. And I ask that you would help us to rely on you and rely on others to help us, and not just rely on ourselves and rely on our own understanding of ourselves and how sin works, because if we do that, then we're setting ourselves up for failure. So Father, I ask that you would help us to keep our head on a swivel as we go through this life, that you would deliver us from our temptations and help us to be an example and a role model to others. ask these things in your Son Jesus' name.
Amen. I read in the devotional this morning, or maybe it was last time, I can't remember. It said, temptation isn't something that just happens. It comes from our desires. If we don't desire something, we won't be tempted by it. You're not going to be tempted to eat concrete, is what the point was. So this next song is called Take My Life. And the first line of the chorus says, take my heart and form it. Our hearts are where our desires come from. So if our desires for God and the things of God, we're going to be less likely to get tempted, because our affection, as the devotion said, is going to be towards God and not towards sin. So let's stand and sing the song that hopefully will encourage us to not be tempted, not becoming complacent, but to have our affection be for God, to have Him take our hearts, take our mind, take our will, and form them to what He would have them be. Just like the deer seeks the water, pants for the water, so we should long after God. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longs.
would be the only one that we desire, and that everything we do would be to glorify you. Father, I ask that you would help us and make us conscientious of all the sin and all the opportunities to sin that are around us, for us to not think that we have it figured out, to not get complacent, and certain things aren't going to be a challenge for us, but to understand that sin can strike us when we least expect it. So let that be our challenge and our item to consider this week. Father, I ask that you would bless us and allow us to bless others as we depart from here until we meet again. In your Son Jesus' name I pray.